Hello and welcome to the Conscious Diva podcast. I'm Tatiana, and joining me in this episode is wellness advocate and wilderness guide, Sydney Williams. Sydney shares her healing journey from eating and drinking her feelings to hiking her feelings in her new book, Hiking Your Feelings, Blazing a Trail to Self-Love. This book is a beautiful story revealing how we can turn our pain into power. It's part inspirational memoir and part practical guide. Hiking Your Feelings offers a toolkit for unpacking your trauma pack to become the best version of you. I love this episode so much, and I really enjoyed reading Sydney's book, and I hope you do too. Please hop over to the show website page at theconsciousdiva.com for more information about Sydney and her work as an author, speaker, and founder of Hiking My Feelings, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the healing power of nature. You can also follow me on Instagram at The Conscious Diva. Thank you so much for listening. Well, thank you. So good to meet you. And I love
Nice
your
to meet
book,
you as well.
Hiking Your Feelings.
Yes, thank you. She's a beaut.
No, it's awesome. It was a really beautiful read.
I was kind of digging through some of the interviews you've done, and this is right in line. So I'm excited to chat today.
Okay, perfect. All right. So would you mind sharing your story? Because you have a really fascinating story and there's so many different aspects to it. So I'm just going to have you please feel like, wherever you want to go with it, just, tell us all from the beginning
Yeah.
what you were doing.
So Hiking Your Feelings is essentially the remastering of my first book, Hiking My Feelings. And I wrote the first book in 2019. I was on the road doing a speaking tour that was kind of opposite of how I imagined this journey would go. Like in my mind, the path was write the book, do the speaking, you've got the book to sell, right? But I didn't have a book yet, and I didn't even have the organization yet. Like it was literally just me and my story. And so in 2018 and 2019, what is now Hiking My Feelings started as me driving around with my husband in our 1998 Chevy van. I'm currently broadcasting from Hiking My Feelings headquarters.
Oh, great.
And
Is that the van? You're in it.
yeah, this
I
is
love it.
it. Tie-dye curtains and all. I made those.
Fantastic. Yay.
So we were just going around the country. I spoke at like 60 different REI stores. I spoke at the University of Kansas for the women's rowing team, which I used to be a member of, different business groups, different social groups, and really just talking about the healing power of nature and sharing the story that is now captured in the book of the two hikes I did across Catalina Island, the first being in 2016 and the second in 2018. And so the difference between the two books is massive and also not. So if you're listening and you're like, where do I start? You can skip the first book. If you want to read, like compare notes, that's fine. I don't waste your time. That's cool. But if you want to just jump in, the book that I released this year, Hiking Your Feelings, Blazing a Trail to Self-Love, is the version of the book that I wasn't confident enough to write in 2019. And I say that because I have no letters after my name, right? Like I'm not a doctor. I wanted to be. And when you read the book, you'll understand why I'm not. And I am not a therapist, though therapy is amazing. And it was a really difficult kind of time in my life where I was trying to find the words to articulate the feelings that I had experienced on that island and the transformation and the growth that I experienced. And so the first book didn't really get its due diligence. So when I had the opportunity to speak with the publisher, I was pitching a book that I haven't even written yet. And at the end of the meeting, I was like, I also have this book that I feel like kind of got squashed by the pandemic because I was a week into my book tour when the pandemic happened. So if we could like breathe new life into this, I've learned a lot. I have more confidence. There's a lot that I want to add that I didn't add in 2019. Can we do that? And they're like, yes. So my story goes, I grew up in Kansas. I was not an outdoorsy person. Outdoorsy for me was riding my bike around the neighborhood and going down to the creek, right? Like not a whole lot of outdoor recreation happening, but I did learn. I got my first taste of the healing power of nature when I was on the women's rowing team at the University of Kansas in college. And my freshman year, I was on the novice team, and we were doing 2-a-day workouts, strength and conditioning in the morning, water workouts in the afternoon to train for the regattas that were coming up. And it was the most in shape I've ever been, but also I had the full support of an athletic department. I had tutors. I had all the resources available to student athletes. And at the end of the day, when we would do these 2-a-days, I would be so exhausted, but also my mind was clear. I had worked my body to the point of just melting any resistance that I had mentally to what was going on in my life. and cleared my mind of all my worries. And then I was just like tired but clear. And I was like, this is sick.
Mhm.
And then when I lost rowing, I wasn't tall enough to join the varsity team my sophomore year. So after rowing, there was kind of this period of time where I was like, I'm missing something. I'm missing a team environment. I'm missing getting outside. And after graduation, I ended up learning how to skydive by myself. And that's where I met my husband, Barry.
Wait,
And
hang on. How do you learn how to skydive by yourself?
oh,
You
great
don't just
question.
get a plane and leap out.
Right. Yeah. No, that's not recommended. So traditionally skydiving, if you've ever been on your first jump, traditionally you're attached to an instructor. That's called tandem skydiving. And if you'd like to learn how to skydive by yourself, then you wear your own parachute. But for the first several jumps of the training progression, you're jumping with instructors that hold on to you in free fall. They teach you everything you need to know about what happens when your parachute malfunctions. How do you save your own life? How do you move your body in free fall and use the wind to your advantage in body flight? How to pilot a parachute. And you wear your own equipment. So they're holding on to you in free fall. They're giving you hand signals that you've predetermined what they mean. And then after a series of 25 jumps, at least here in the United States, you earn your USPA A license for skydiving. And then there's a progression throughout that. So if you want to learn how to jump by yourself, that's the progression. And then if you stick around in the sport, there's lots of ways that you can enjoy skydiving. You can jump on the weekends, lots of weekend warriors that work full-time jobs and then come live at the drop zone over the weekend. But I moved into competitive skydiving pretty quickly after I started. And that was where I really got to understand mindset because there's no other thing that you can be doing. You have to single task when you're skydiving. Like I wasn't thinking about client deadlines. At the time I was working in PR and marketing in Chicago at the world's largest PR firm. And I was like, just in meetings all day, emails around the clock, just lots of stress straight out of college. And skydiving, for the minute that I was in free fall, gave me peace. And that sounds weird. If you're like, you must be an adrenaline junkie. I'm not. Like I found calm in free fall. And
Yeah, I can
through the
understand
mindset.
that. I can understand that because there's a connection with the wind and feeling the elements on your face at that speed that's blowing it right up into your, like you can barely, that's why you wear a mask. You can't have your
Yeah.
eyes open.
Yeah, well, and the juxtaposition between free fall and how noisy it is, and then once you open your canopy, the peace that you find, because then you're just floating, and the only air or the only sounds you're hearing are like your own thoughts. So, but even in that scenario, like I started to have these opportunities where I was disconnected from distractions. But in skydiving, the mission was not to heal and process my thoughts; it was to get down to the ground safely. So when this hiking thing came up, like I had done some running here and there, not good at it, don't like it. And every other attempt to like manage my health had been rooted in vanity, right? Like I've got a reunion coming up, better get into like 3 dress sizes smaller so I feel good and look like I'm in high school still. And hiking came into my life as a function of like my husband used to live in New Hampshire. That's where he was born and raised. He was hiking all over the White Mountains, lived in Dover. And I was just like, I had a week off between Christmas and New Year's. And I was like, where do we want to go? Like, I don't have to respond to emails. I don't have to do anything. Like, the entire agency was closed. So, this first trip, my husband was like, well, you got a week off. You want to get off the grid? We had done like a little California road trip the year prior, and I really liked camping and it was super fun. And so he's like, let's just go backpacking. And I was like, cool. I've not trained. I don't have any equipment. I have no idea what's coming. And what I found on the first trip was I knew because I lived it that I had been through a lot. In the 4 years that I was skydiving, 23 of my friends passed away. And
Yeah,
that,
that was insane. When I read that in your book, in the second half of the book, I was just like, because I wasn't sure how many friends had passed away. Because you mentioned them,
right.
almost all of them, right in the first part, and then that section when you do the hike, the same trail, the second time 2 years later, I was like, oh my God, in 4 years, 23 friends, that's intense. And I know you're getting into the crux of the story now, but I wanted to. Something came up when you were describing your sky jumping. I can imagine when you were on the trail, because you only got a matter of minutes, seconds to minutes, jumping out of the plane to getting to Earth. As you said, your mind was clear, but you perhaps didn't realize you needed to process so much. Some friends hadn't passed away at that point either. But then when you're on the trail hiking, here you are in a whole other space, off the grid, no cell phones, where you're pushing yourself to your limits. And with that, you're feeling the emotions in the body and where they're being stored and what needs to
Hmm.
come up and be processed. So yeah, continue, and then go into that, because so much happened
Yeah.
for you. And the first hike in particular, and such an amazing comparison to that second, the same hike, but 2 years on, and all these
And
epiphanies you've experienced.
yeah. So, and I think that's a really cool point. Like, if I look back, if I think about, if I know what to be true from my experience hiking and healing, it's the removal of the distractions and the length of time that I have to be able to hear and to be able to process. If I think, and to your point, and we'll talk about the deeply physical journey that was the first hike, but if I look back retroactively, skydiving gave me a lot of the mental capacity to be able to handle what I experienced on the trail because
Mm.
I learned how to manage stress. I knew I could literally save my own life if my parachute malfunctioned, and that translated into confidence to be able to move through these things. So leading up to this hike, like my friends were dying between 2010 and 2014. The first hike was in 2016. I knew they were dead, right? Like, and at some point I had been doing some kind of processing. And by processing, I mean getting absolutely wasted
And
because
let's
that's
just
how
be clear,
skydivers.
these weren't skydiving deaths, just to be clear. These weren't people who had skydiving deaths. I just want to make people.
Actually, so it was three veterans who took their own lives. One was a motorcycle accident. The rest were skydiving or base jumping accidents where it wasn't necessarily an equipment malfunction, but people that were so progressive in the sport that were pushing the limits of their equipment and or their limits within themselves. So I got on the trail in 2016. Now I've had, at that point, I had 700 jumps, 4 years in the sports, lots of mental training between my time as a collegiate athlete and my time as a competitive skydiver. The mindset stuff dialed in. I get on the trail, and leading up to this process, like I didn't have access to therapy. And when I did, I was ashamed that I needed it. And when I wanted it, I couldn't afford it. So all of my efforts to heal leading up to that first hike and even up until as recently as 2021 were not in a traditional therapeutic setting. I read every book I could get my hands on. Brene Brown, love you, girl. Thank you. She taught me so much about my emotions. And then I did the journaling exercises. I signed up for programs. I tried to start a business. Like I did all kinds of things to try to help me heal. But the thing that kept happening and the thing that was resolved on the trail was when I first started trying to heal, I would be like in a meditation. And then I have a flashback and then my whole body shuts down. And I was like, I can't live like this. And so I would just push it away and I'd never go back to that activity. And so on the trail, the first time I was wildly out of shape. My from skydiving competitively to just ballooning in weight because drinking was my method of choice to cope, and that's not healthy. So the first trip, I had no idea what I was doing. I was wildly underprepared physically, emotionally, spiritually, all of it. And it was a deeply physical journey for me. I have always been present in my body to some degree or another, but up until that trip, I hated my body. I despised it. And I could not look at myself in a mirror without nitpicking. I learned that from my mother and every TV show and movie ever. And I think to some degree I was a little bit brainwashed by the media and other things that I had consumed where I thought if I hated myself that made me more valuable or approachable because God forbid I love myself. We can't have that. A woman who loves herself is very scary and we don't know what to do with that. That's the story I was telling myself. So this first hike was like all about my body. I got a blister a quarter mile into a 6-day journey. Like I was not prepared. I thought wearing my hiking boots and my standing desk was the same as breaking them in. It's not, listeners. Don't do that.
Mm-mm, it is
So
not.
it was just so physical. And so every single step hurt. And I didn't even have time to process anything mentally. All I could think about was my body. But the difference was when I went shopping before that first trip, when I was in the dressing room at REI in Encinitas, California, I did not nitpick my body. I just looked at it and I was like, girl, how did we get here? Like, what is happening in this dressing room? I do not recognize this body. This is not the athlete body I've been living in. What are we doing? How did we get here? And it wasn't like, now get it together because you're a piece of poo and you suck. Like, it was just like curious. And that shaped that whole trip. Like every single ache and pain I was aware of, I was deeply familiar with the parts of my body that were not tuned up for this adventure. In fact, I didn't even complete the first trip. The first trip, we had some rain on the island, which made our second to last day absolutely miserable because for folks that live in areas that get muddy and have a mud season, the mud on Catalina Island is peanut butter. It's your favorite texture. It's disgusting. And I was just like, this is awful. And by the end of by the time we got ready to check in to go to our last campsite, the ranger at the little stand on the dock was like, "Hey, so here's the deal. The trail is in questionable condition, and we're probably not going to go tomorrow, but we'll let you know." And I was like, "My body is in a questionable condition right now. I don't want to continue." So we stopped. And I'm a woman that says she's going to do what she does. And I posted on Facebook that I was doing this trip. And I was like, who am I? I can't even finish a trail. All the haters on the internet, there aren't any. All the haters on the internet are going to tell me that I suck and that I'm not good. And none of that mattered. Like I had those thoughts, but they were fleeting. And by the end of that trip, when I got into the shower in Two Harbors, I like, not for nothing, not like some sexy rub down, but I was just like washing the filth off my body after not showering for 5 days. And I was like, hey, calves, God, oh my God, these thighs, they are burning, but they carried me up that mountain. My butt is working. This stomach, while it was like really sausage squeezed into my pants when I first got here, because I got the biggest size that REI had at the time, they were fitting like appropriately. Like I lost a little bit of weight from, exercising all day, every day for 5 days. And it was just, it was amazing. And it was hard and it was terrible. And I loved it. And I got home and I was like, I have unfinished business with this place. So the first hike, deeply physical. 9 months later, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And that's where all of the work that I had done with mindset and skydiving, this new relationship that I have with my body, because like even though I couldn't walk right for 2 weeks after that first trip, I wanted more. I loved how I felt out there, even if I was in pain. And instead of being like, God, fatty, get it together, I was like, hey, what would be possible if we honored our inner athlete? And what would be possible if we just walked through this and we just didn't judge ourselves? Like, can I do that? And if so, what does that feel like? Like, what is my life like if I take all the energy that I spend hating my body, criticizing my body, worrying about my body, comparing my body to just acceptance? And
Well,
that first hike gave me that.
I have a quick question about that because when I was reading the book, and by the way, you described all of that experience on Catalina Island really well.
Thank
You
you.
can visualize, you're welcome. You can visualize the experience, and you don't even have to have ever stepped foot on any kind of trail to understand what you're describing, how torrential downpour rain is experienced, and how it very quickly turns the dry ground into, as you described, this peanut butter like texture that was all around you. And then, but what I was wondering was, as you were, and as you're writing this book, I'm assuming it's retrospective thinking because now you've had time to heal. It's been several years. And when you were describing in the book, as you were blessing your body, essentially blessing your body and giving it gratitude for supporting you over this arduous hike, literally, like when you're talking about, when you describe the blisters on your feet, and I've hiked in Nepal, and I did train for that because I knew it was going to be way above elevation, even though I live in Vermont and I'm very fortunate to be near ski mountains. In the summer, I used them as my training grounds,
Right.
put weight, added water bottles to my pack. I didn't go out and buy brand new hiking shoes. I kept my worn in existing ones, which were in great condition. I just bought new laces in case they wore out. I had the right socks, all that stuff. So as you're describing this in my mind, I was like, oh my God, like, oh my God, I could totally picture like this disaster that you were experiencing all over. And then it was like the gods gave you a moment of peace with all that rain so you could actually have a break. And you
Yes.
acknowledge that in your body, and you are like, thank you. I actually just literally need to stop for a sec. So the question I want to know, when you're writing this, in that moment when you were blessing your body, was that a retrospective realization when you were writing, or were you literally in there going, oh my God, thank you, feeling yourself realizing, shit, I've actually lost a bit of weight from this. Oh my God. Like you were beginning to describe a little bit of that, but I'm just wondering how much deeper did that go with you in that moment?
To answer the first question, it was in the moment. So it wasn't like a retroactive realization. I like went into that shower with the intention of doing this. And where that came from, honestly, it feels like one of those things where it's like the universe just drops an idea in your head and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, I like, cause I don't think I would have independently thought. I just harassed this body all over this island, and now I should bless it. Like those, I don't think that sentence would have come to me
Yeah.
naturally at that time because I was so exhausted.
Yeah.
So to be gifted this like idea to have this ritual with myself was just so loving
Yeah.
and truly wonderful. And I think so the parts that I describe are the ritual that I was doing, but the extension of that, the ripple of that, I mean, what a beautiful question to reflect back on, because like I can't even count the ways that it's rippled out and immersed itself into every area of my life. Now, am I perfect and do I walk around all day worshiping my goddess body? Absolutely not. I'm a human. Like,
No, but
that's
it's
just
not
not how it
about that.
works.
It's the awareness
Yeah.
that, what our bodies do for us. And I don't think really not many of us give our bodies credit for the good
I know
things
I
that,
didn't.
you know.
Yeah. Well, and that's a really big part of it too. Cause like I was like, okay, how did we get here? Okay. We'll figure that out later. Grief, drinking, whatever. That's for hike too. But in this moment, in this body, in this mindset, I know that I love doing this. And what would be possible if my body wasn't the thing that was getting in the way? And
Mm.
that was the question that I wanted to know. Because like if I know that I like this and I know I want to do it, like I had no idea how, like, the metaphors that I would start to see between hiking, backpacking, and life, right? Like, there's the trail of life. It's our foundational exercise of the work we do now. It's a section in each chapter of the book where we reflect on the things that are happening. And it's such a beautiful framing for reestablishing a connection with your body. And to your point, I had no idea what my body did for me. Like, I killed it in anatomy class in college. Like, I was an A student in anatomy and physiology, but like, I had no idea. Like, I didn't know what signals I was getting until I got diabetes. And then I was like, oh. So skydiving gave me this mindset work. This first hike was deeply physical and rewired my brain and the connection that I have with my body, which set me up for tremendous success managing diabetes because I had already gotten over the shame for the most part, or at least identified where it came from and that it wasn't mine. And then I was just like ready if I already wanted to honor my inner athlete and if I already wanted to do this more and what would be possible if my body wasn't the thing in the way of my success, then I was like, diabetes, you ain't got nothing on Sydney Williams. Like, I am ready to crush this. And I did. Like 9 months after I did that first hike, I was diagnosed. And at the time, I was still working at the agency. I had a really nice salary and an incredible benefits package. My boss was awesome and wasn't micromanaging my time or my appointments or my need to go manage my health. And I was just set up for supreme success. I lived in San Diego. I had access to fresh, whole, healthy foods. Like diabetes management was so, I don't want to say easy because if it was easy, everybody could do it. But my doctor made it so simple to understand, and that she divided up all the factors that can impact blood sugar in the body to 4 quadrants. So I had food, exercise, medicine, and stress, and then that just became my rubric for life. Like how we used to grade ourselves and our projects at school, like that was my curriculum and that was my thing. Like if I woke up in the morning and my numbers were elevated, what did I eat yesterday? Did I
Mm.
move my body? Am I taking my medications on time as prescribed every day? And what about my stress? And I got to the first 3 of those 4 right away. Stopped eating like a 12-year-old boy, started hiking around the neighborhood, just walks around the neighborhood to start. Like I started backpacking and then I was like, maybe I should, I don't know, walk and like train a little. So I did that around my neighborhood. We had a nice little like a 45-minute, hour long little route that I gave myself. And then when that got to be too easy, I started hiking local trails and I was taking my medications as prescribed. And the stress was the thing that was really killing me. So I had tried to make some accommodations at work, but it wasn't possible for me at that point in time in my life to deal with everything that I still hadn't dealt with. Like all of that grief is still in the back of my head. It's stored in my body. I haven't actually touched that yet. The first thing I touched was my relationship with my body. Diabetes set me up on a path to then, by the time I got ready for that second hike, I had lost 60 pounds. I had quit 2 jobs in the span of 5 months, that agency job, and then I joined a startup that didn't work out either. And I was like, I don't know what's next, but it's not this. And I had scheduled a hike across Catalina again for my 33rd birthday in June that year in 2018. And I was like, okay, so what would be possible this time if the hike itself wasn't the hard part? Because the last time the hike was the hard part. I couldn't think
Yeah.
about anything other than my body in this hike. But now that I had some miles under my belt, now that I had lost a bunch of weight and my body wasn't the thing in the way, I was flying. I was like a little Betty goat going up those mountains. So
Well,
I was really curious about that.
before you go into this story of the second hike, just share how you discovered you were diabetic. And I wondered, reading the book, if there were any earlier signs, 6, maybe 9 months leading up to that during that first hike.
Yeah. If there were any signs during that first hike, like knowing the signs that I had leading up to the diagnosis, which was I was incredibly thirsty. I was urinating frequently and I had really bad like abdominal pain, which is what actually prompted me to go to urgent care. If I think back to that first hike, being thirsty, I would have chalked that up to hiking.
Mm.
Urination, I would have chalked that up to hydration. And
Overwater,
I
yeah.
wouldn't have even known, you know? And it was early enough to where I was definitely diabetic. It wasn't pre-diabetes when I was diagnosed. They were like, you have type 2. Let's get it together. But it's early. So like, we can get on this if you want to. I was like, I do. So the diagnosis really set me up for success on that second hike. So in the second hike, I'm going into this and I'm unemployed. I'm a relatively newly diagnosed, now uninsured person living with diabetes who's got it managed, but is it reversed yet? No. And I don't know where my next paycheck's coming from. My husband was working part-time at the time and he wasn't satisfied in his position. And so it was like a big pivot. And I was like, I don't know what's next. I know it's not this. And I also know that I have 2 weeks before this next trip. So in the 2 weeks before the second hike on Catalina, we were hiking all the time. And it was on a hike that I was training for the TCT the second time where I discovered the phrase hiking my feelings. So I was at the top of this mountain training for Catalina. We were off at a place called Cushy Pie. It's a mountain in East County, San Diego, also known as Stonewall Peak. And I was up on top of this mountain. It promised 360-degree views. I was like, I'm unemployed, but I know how to use social media. I'm going to be an influencer. I don't know if anybody wakes up and is like, you know what, I'm going to do influence. I don't know if that's how that choice gets made or like you turn into one because you're so good at what you do. Doesn't matter. I thought this is my new choice. So I'm going to be up here on the top of this mountain with views from Tijuana up to Carlsbad. And I'm going to show the internet what I got. Except I got up there. It's all clouds. Ain't nothing to influence. The only thing I'm influencing is this little squirrel guy who wants my almonds. And I'm like, sir, no. So I'm sitting there and I was like, my work taught me what my work was. I learned my first lesson before I even knew what I was going to be doing. And that was when there's nothing to influence and there's no view to be seen, turn inward. Because I was up there and I was calm. And I was like, the last time not the last time, but like before when I was hiking up mountains, I'd get to the top and I'd be wasted, like not like hammered, but like just spent and exhausted. Yeah. And so I was like, why do I feel like I want to lay down? Like, why does this feel like Savasana at the end of a yoga class? This makes no sense. And then I was like, well, okay. And other times of stress or sadness or celebration, I would eat or drink my feelings. Oh, I've swapped that. Now I'm hiking my feelings. And I was like, okay, yeah, coping mechanism swap. Love that for me. And then I was like, I'm not satisfied with that though. Why was I eating and drinking my feelings to begin with? Because for as much as that is ingrained in our culture here in America, for sure, and around the world and other places as well, why? Why was I doing that? What caused that? And so then my experience going into the next hike, I was like, okay, I'm going to put this hiking my feelings thing to work on Catalina. And I'm just like, what is available to me emotionally, spiritually, mentally outside of the physical experience? Because I've already done this trail once. I've been here before. Now, did I complete it? No, but I've got a little thing to solve with this mountain or with this island, and I'm ready. Like I'm ready emotionally. I'm ready spiritually. I'm ready physically. Like, I don't know that I've ever been this prepared for anything actually ever. And so my first note was like, oh my God, like what? Let's go see. Let's find out. And so we get on the trail the second time. And like, I swear to God, I'm just putting this out here. I want a movie to be made of this book because this is the scene that I want. Like the opening montage of hike number 2 is as follows. We are at our friend's house, same friends that we crashed with before our hike in 2016, except I missed my alarm. So I missed the Lyft driver. I wake up to the Lyft driver calling and I'm stressed out. I'm like, I was ready. Like I was so prepared. And then I messed up because I slept in and I was like, dang it. So I go and we're rushing and we finally get in a lift and the guy's like, hey, what's up with the backpacks? And I was like, we're going to go hike across Catalina Island. He's like, I didn't even know you could do that. And how lucky are you that you get to do this with your partner and somebody that you love and you don't have to like go scrounge up your buddies to go on this trip. And I was like, I looked at Barry and I like elbowed him a little bit. I was like, babe, look at how lucky we are. And then we get to the thing. So it's like these flashes, right? It's like we're in the car. We're so lucky. And then we get to the port and we're there and we're getting ready to board. And there's a guy that works on Catalina Island behind us. And he's like, you guys hiking the TCT? And much like I did after my first tandem skydive, because after one tandem skydive, clearly I was a professional. I said this. Yes, and I've done it before and I'm ready to do it again. And he's like, awesome. We've added some shade structures. We rerouted the trail a little bit. So it's a little bit more forgiving for the hiker's knees. And I was like immediately thinking about Sheep Shoot Road and hoping that that was the case. And it was. And I was just like, oh my God. He's like, and so have fun. And I was like, oh my God, they like rerouted the trail for us specifically to have this new experience. Wow. And then we get there and we're hiking and past the mile 1 marker, going through town. We pass the golf course and a golfer stops golfing and shouts at us from the green. And he's like, what are you doing? Backpacking. Didn't even know we could do that. You've inspired me. I was like, we're lucky. We're inspiring. Like, what else is possible? And then we start going up like the really hard first climb out of Avalon, up Hermit Gulch to the ridgeline to get onto the proper TCT. And oh my God, like I passed the place where I got my first hotspot. And I was like, this is where I had my like Reese Witherspoon as Cheryl Strayed moment from Wild. I almost like just chucked my boots because I had a blister a quarter mile in. And but at the time I was like, that first hike, everything felt like it took so long. Like when you go to a new place, right? Like you're on a road trip and you're like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? And then you start driving home after the experience and you're like, I got home in 5 minutes. Like why? So the first hike felt so long in that first section. I was like, surely I was like 8 miles in. I was a quarter mile in on that first blister. And I was like, and so I'm just like, so it's like this, it's this beautiful, like, it's a new experience because I feel like I'm in a new body. And it's a new experience because I have a new relationship. Like now I have a year and a half of experience of not talking to myself like a jerk and like really loving everything about myself. And so I'm like, oh my God, like this is just so great. And my birthday's the next day. I was like, what else could go right today? Like this is so fun. And it was just magic. Like every single
You
aspect
did.
of it.
You had a gift from nature on your birthday.
Yes. Yes. And like every single aspect. And like this is the second hike is where I really got into the nitty gritty of like what is hiking my feelings? Like what does that actually mean? And what is the practice of it? And so what I realized was there was this one stretch in particular over a course of 2 days where every limiting belief, every invasive thought that I've ever thought in my life was coming up and surfacing. And I had done a limiting belief exercise. I read The Big Leap by Gay Hicks. Like I read Gay Hendricks. Like I read everything about this concept of these beliefs that may or may not be ours. Where do they come from? Nobody knows. And I had tried to do that. And it was the same thing that I mentioned earlier. Like I would go through that exercise. I'd have a flashback. I'd shut down. But on the mountain, I realized like I'm still going. Like I'm just surpassing these thoughts. Like I'm sitting with them. I'm like, oh, I'm too fat. And I'm like, says who? Like, don't matter. And compared to what? Like, compared to like the sample sizes that fashion brands put out because they make more money on smaller sizes because it requires less fabric. Like, why am I holding myself to all these wacky new standards? Like, this is just bananas. So I'd have the thought, I'd like reframe it, I'd let it go. And sometimes they'd come back. And then I just like, what I realized was when I was in motion, and I had these thoughts. It's not that the flashbacks didn't happen. They did. It's not that the negative thoughts went away completely. They didn't. But I was able to move through it. And I had something to do with that fight or flight response that would shut my body down in prior attempts to do this. And I could just stomp up the ridgeline and go through like 3 or 4 thoughts instead of shutting down after one. And I was like, this is amazing. Deeply cathartic, very emotional. Like there were points where I was like doubled over, like snot pouring out my nose. My face is a waterfall, just like remembering these friends that I've lost. And that was a big part of the first chunk of the trip was like, as this methodical unpacking. I use the metaphor of unpacking our trauma packs. Like we all have these invisible backpacks that we wear and they're full of our trauma and our experiences. Some of it's stuff that we just like hold on to for other people. And some of it's stuff that we created ourselves. And so at each step, like I'm like, oh, these are my dead friends. I'm going to take the heavy stuff out of the backpack and then process it, let it be, move through it. And then I'm not just going to like leave my dead friends on the island though. Like I want to keep their memories alive. Like what was their legacy? What is my favorite memory with these people? And so it was like this weight was lifting off my like literal physical weight, even though I wasn't taking anything out of my backpack, but I felt lighter every time I doubled over and like cried to the point of almost throwing up. Like it was just amazing. And I was like, I feel like a feral animal out here. Like I feel tapped into the human experience. And it was just, the second hike was just wild on the processing side of things.
Were you sharing any of this with your husband, Barry, as you were walking, or was it all internalizing?
100%. Yeah.
Okay.
As we were walking, not so much. Barry would kind of go up ahead of me, so I had some space. He knew what was happening. Like he'd turn around and be like, "What's up?" I'm like, "Just hiking my feelings. It's fine. It's fine." And at the end of the day, I'd be like, "So this is what I processed." And I'm like writing down because I had like my little trail journal that I made. And Barry's like, "Wow, this is something." Like, and he was just supportive. He was like, "If you need anything, let me know." I was like, "Man, I'm just kind of hiking my own hike here, like just getting it done." And the big realization, like the massive dot connecting that happened was So like it's this like build up, this like drum. It's like starts with a slow clap, a slow drum, and then we're just like banging on drums with this realization. So like I had these really nice moments where I'm like, oh my God, this isn't as hard as it was last time. Yay me. And then I'm like, I checked my blood sugar for the first time on the first day, and I was like, I can tuck this away. Because that was one of the big differentiating factors was like, how do I nourish my body on the trail when I'm hiking all day long? Because the ingredients on the things that I'm usually eat while backpacking are some of the ingredients that I've been actively not enjoying because they don't contribute to positive health outcomes for diabetes management. My doctor was like, girl, you need to be worried about your blood sugar going low, not going high on a hike, because you're going to be out there all day, every day. Fuel your body, eat whatever you want. And I was like, say that again. Eat. You're a doctor. You're say it. You want me to eat whatever I want? Okay. So it was just like it was the realization that like I had my nutrition dialed in so I could like stop worrying about that. And then like I had these experiences where I'm reframing these limiting beliefs and I was like, wow. And then like I cleared so much space metaphorically in this
Yeah.
backpack where I was like, there's still something heavy in here. Like what is this? And so we're on our way up to the tallest point, and I'm like, at this point, I'm like, I'm so in it. I'm like, I'm running with a backpack that weighs like 30 pounds. I'm running up a hill. I was like, who? I'm like disassociated in a good way out of my body watching it. And I'm like, who is this chick running up a hill to the highest point? This is wild. And I got up there and I was like, my whole body was just like vibrating. And I was like, what is happening? How does this work? Like, what are we doing here? When was the last time I felt this good in my body? When was the last time I felt this confident? When was the last time I practiced gratitude this regularly? Like, I'm just checking the list. I'm like, I'm literally killing it on healing right now. Like, I'm getting an A in healing. And I was like, but like, cause it felt familiar. I was like, I have felt this victorious, electrified alignment feeling before. What is this? And when did I feel it last? And so then we start going down into this last campground, the one that we didn't get to do on the first trip. And so like there's this promise of the view of the entire California coast from as far as the eye can see, 180-degree views of the coast. Only 8 campsites on this private remote beach. It's the one site that I really wanted on the first one. It's also the one we didn't get to go to. So to get down is very steep. This is all new territory too, right? Like I haven't been on this part of the trail before. And I think to your point about repeating an experience, all of the hiking on that second hike up until that point was so familiar, even with the rerouting, even in a different body. I didn't have to think about the hiking because I had already been there. So now I'm like, all my alerts are up, not in a bad way, but I'm just like really embodied and aware. And I'm like, okay, I'm in tune with the sensations in my body. That's cool. That didn't happen the last time. It was all pain. I'm aware of like this emotional release that I'm having. And I'm just like really, really dialed in. And so I start walking down, and for the hikers out there, it's the really slick, super steep grade, shaly stuff that's just really slippery and just crumbles under your
Do you
feet.
have hiking
So I've got
sticks
my,
with you? So you
yeah.
can,
So I've
yeah.
got my hiking poles and I'm like, I'm digging in. And Barry's up ahead as he usually is. And this is so steep that I'm watching my feet. And then I look up to see where Barry's at to make sure I didn't lose him. You can't lose him. It's on an island. He's not going to go that far. But I look up and I almost fell down. And I was like, not today, Williams. And so I like took a moment. I put my poles back in the ground. And then I took a deep breath. And then I used to describe this as like a universal 2x4 to the face because it felt so jarring, but that isn't how the universe works. She's not a violent gal. So it's like a little butterfly kiss right on my forehead, maybe in my third eye, to tell me to pay attention. And by the way, here's your insight. The last time that I felt that good was when I was on the women's rowing team at the University of Kansas in that body, in those practices. The last time that I felt that good, if I put that in the timeline, was right before I experienced sexual assault when I was in college. And it wasn't scary, that realization. It didn't make me sad. I felt free. I felt like I knew that I just opened Pandora's box because, oh my God, why was I eating and drinking my feelings to begin with? Yeah, well, when you don't tell anybody about the most violent thing that's ever happened to you and you walk with that secret for 11 years, yeah, there's going to be some things that come up. And for me, the coping, the eating and drinking was a direct result of not talking about it.
Yeah.
So now I'm like, overjoyed. Like, I thought I felt good on top of that mountain. I was like, I just unlocked a secret. It's
Yeah.
the most important thing of my life. Like, I'm singing it terribly. Like, I sound like not great, but I'm just like, I'm skipping down steep stuff. Also not recommended. I had to like contain my joy because I was like, I don't want to fall down and like not be able to share
Well,
this realization with
that
Barry.
experience of like connecting an experience to your behavior and why you've been this way for so long, it's the most insanely freeing,
So
I don't
freeing.
want to say the word experience again, but my God, it is the most freeing experience. And to have these epiphanies and you feel like your body has, and it's a whole body experience. You've just like
Yeah.
let it go. Like,
Yeah.
whoa, it's like comes to the surface. You get like, tingly feelings. You get like,
Mhm.
your hair stand on end. It's like, oh my God, like, like it's such an aha moment. It's indescribable unless you've gone through it and and then you're like, oh shit, oh my God, I know what to do. Like, I know what to
Yeah.
do. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, and
Yeah, it's amazing.
it was just, it was
I love.
so magical. And over the years, like between drinking and staying out late and going to shows or working when I was bartending, like my sleep schedule was never, it was never bad. Like I wasn't ever like, oh my God, I have a problem sleeping. In the first years after the assault, absolutely. Like it was difficult. And that's why the drinking happened. So I was actually, I'm so cute. I'm like, I didn't have a problem sleeping. I was like, because I was hammered. Like, okay. So rewind. The reason I was sleeping at all after the assault was because of my coping mechanisms that were unhealthy. All of which is to say, I still to this day, I don't think I've had as good of a night's sleep as I did that night on Parsons Landing on the ground. Like we cowboy camped. So we weren't in our tent. We were just sleeping under the stars. And I've never had a night of sleep that was that restorative,
Wow.
that felt like such a punctuation mark on a story. Now, was it an exclamation point, a question mark, a comma, or a period? To be seen. But at the time, I was like, oh, just like full body, every cell could exhale. And it was absolutely magic. And like that's the story that's kind of encapsulated in the book, like the trauma that endured and all the things that hiking taught me and how I was able to connect with my body and how exhausting my physical body freed me up to process the things that were in my head. And understanding finally what that yoga teacher meant when she said that trauma is stored in your hips
Yeah.
or the body keeps the score. Like I had heard all these things and then I was like, uh, oh, I get
Oh,
it. Like,
yeah.
yes.
You understand now.
Yeah. So that's the story of the book. And then
Well,
what happened was,
I'm going to come back to what happened because what's happening now in your life is remarkable and
yeah.
wonderful and just amazing how you're helping other people. But I just quickly wanted to touch on the point that what you experienced was very meditative and
Mm,
massively, hugely awakening. It was a spiritual awakening you had. And, often people say, I can't meditate. Oh, I find it boring. I can't do this. Or, oh, spiritual practice. Wow, woo woo, whatever. But you experienced full-blown a spiritual connection to
hmm
something greater than yourself, which guided you. You gave yourself the permission to listen, to hear that, then you followed that guidance. And those what it I know what it sounds like to hear your inner guidance, but a lot of people don't, right? And you really trusted. I would love for you to just share, what does that sound like for you that allowed you to really hear, listen, because there's a difference in hearing and listening, and then
mm.
following through with those actions, which has ultimately guided you to your purpose work today.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. I think for me, um, the voices in my head were very, very mean until that after that first hike.
And that's not
Um,
spiritual talk.
no.
That is our own self, our own ego,
hmm
our own mind telling us the negative self-talk, right? That is a very clear difference between that
Yeah.
and this beautiful guidance that comes from.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think and because a lot of folks don't know how to hear that or aren't sure what it is, it's important to distinguish that. Like what I thought was like I was like, well, the universe thinks I'm fat, ugly, stupid. And it's like, no, those are things that I've internalized.
Yeah.
On the island, though, it wasn't, for me, it wasn't like a voice. It wasn't um, it wasn't like, it was more of just like a knowing, a remembering. And so for me, it was like, I found myself expressing myself in ways that I hadn't before because I had never been able to get to the point of expressing what I had learned because I hadn't learned anything because I stopped the healing short. So for me, and the way that I kind of describe the process for me between a like having something activate me, like a trigger or something, or a memory or a flashback, the distance between that and the realization of what it is, where it came from, and how I can move through it. I liken them to contractions. Now, I'm not a mother, nor do I care to be, but it's the closest thing I can think of. In that it used to be prior to these sequence of trips that I would get activated by something, and then I could go days, months, years, decades before I understood where it came from. And in the process of reconnecting to my body through hiking and having the physical practice of being able to move through the reactions that my body was having to the work I was doing, when I got to the point like these, as my awareness grew, the distance between those things would shorten. And then at some point, it would be like I could feel the pressure on my chest before I even understood what was activating that. So I was in tune with the physical sensation before the memory even made itself aware to me. And it was the process of moving through that and starting to learn how to actually feel the feelings in my body, to separate those from flashbacks, triggers, and memories, and to understand how it all works together. When I get to the point where I can realize I'm being activated, I have a tool I can deploy, I know what this is from, I know that I am safe. And like now, there's times where I'm like, oh, like I know that this is coming, but like with the onset of a breath. And I'm like, oh, nope, been there, I'm safe, I'm good. And I have my tools. But it's the after effect of that that I didn't realize until after I was off the trail that this was what that spiritual guidance was. For me, it was being out in nature and reconnecting with that. Catalina in particular, Catalina Island didn't break off from the mainland. Like two tectonic plates millions of years ago smushed together and shot up out of the ocean. That's how Catalina came to be. That island is covered in quartz. That
Wow.
island is covered in white sage. That island is covered in, just bathed in sunlight and endemic animals that live there, like just really getting in tune with the environment and being a function of a part of that environment rather than separate from it. It was that disconnection from the planet from which we came that was the spiritual guidance for me. And I guess if you're looking for clues, like if I could retroactively look back at that, it was like the urge of curiosity to go smell something and to reconnect in that way, or the urge to go dig through the rocks on the shores in Parsons Landing and find amethyst and jade. It was this warmth of remembering, like when I had that moment where I was like, oh, the last time I felt this good was before the assault. It was that like warmth of like, you've got this. You've always had the answers. And then this for you specifically, Sydney, this is your physical reminder that you're onto something, is when you feel the warmth wash over you. So that's the language that the spiritual aspect of it spoke to me, was connection with the earth, but also as a function of reconnecting with my body, being able to recognize and understand when I was receiving that kind of guidance or those nudges towards those things that helped me reconnect.
I love that. I love that so much. Thank you very much for explaining. Okay, so you're now doing really incredible work. This book, Hiking Your Feelings, Blazing a Trail to Self-Love, includes at the end of every chapter, you have very user-friendly, very simple, very digestible prompts for people to think about whether they're hiking or not hiking. You can just apply them. But that's not all you're doing. So share how this is now formed into a nonprofit. You have not just your books, but you have hikes that you've arranged, all kinds of things, retreats, because you're doing a lot of really amazing work.
Yeah, thank you. So when I got done with that second hike on Catalina in 2018, when I got back to Cell Signal in Two Harbors, the first point of contact that I made was not my friends or family. I wasn't like, "Hey, mom, dad, I didn't die." I didn't call my friends that were like curious about the trip. I sent a message on Instagram to the Catalina Island Conservancy because they managed the trail. And I sent them a message and I said, "Hi, I have completed the Trans Catalina Trail twice now. A little bit of a fib on the first one. They don't care. I've done the trail twice, and it's been absolutely transformative, life changing, all the adjectives to describe an experience like what I had. How can I help protect and promote this place?" And before they even responded, like I was sitting there waiting to get on the ferry to go back to the mainland. And I was like, is this like, is what I just experienced something that we could repeat for people? Like, what are the components that made this trip what it was for me? One, some mindset work. Two, the hiking. Three, the support and non-judgment that I get to live in every day with my husband, like that level of love and understanding and acceptance and having somebody cheering for you in a beautiful place. So could we replicate that? Now that question would go and fly off into the ether. The universe does what it does. All the dots start to connect, and I would come back around to that. But the first point of contact, that was when they introduced me to REI, and they invited me to join and do a speaking tour around Southern California to start. And then that started into our big tour that we did in 2018 and 2019, hosting talks at all these different establishments and then hikes in each market. Because if you're going to take time out of your life and arrange childcare and somebody to babysit your husband and your pets, like I don't just want you to like
Like how
come
you
and
said
listen.
babysit your husband. I have one of those.
I want you, yeah. And I want you to experience it. Like, don't just take me at my word, like come out and like, let me show you what I'm talking about. And so we did 140 events that first year. And that was all funded thanks to Sydney's credit cards from her corporate life. Like I had when I was making big money, I got lots of wide open credit limits. And I was like, well, here's what I know. I know that if we stay in this house in San Diego with no income coming in, the very tiny cushion that we have will last maybe a couple months. If we go and we sell everything we own and we move into a van and we're mobile and we're not paying rent and we're not paying for utilities and we take this kind of on the road, I know that I have at least enough credit cards to get us through the year, and I have at least enough real money to pay minimum balances on those credit cards. This is not a financial strategy I would recommend to anyone, by the way. I did not start this podcast claiming to be somebody that knows anything about how to do this.
No, we're not a financial podcast. It's okay.
Yeah, no, it's not. So the finance of money for me, or the spirit of money for me, was like, thank you, plastic. But at the end of the year, we had gone to all these different places. We visited 13 national parks. We visited 42 states on this tour. And at every stop, people were like, oh my God, this is epic. But like, now what? You don't live here. Like, what do we do now? And I was like, to be honest, I don't know yet. Like, I haven't seen that. But I wrote that first book and then I self-published it. And then one of the first reviews I got on my first book was that it said that it promised to be a guide, but that it was not. And that they were expecting it to be more about hiking, less about feelings. I was like, read the title, y'all. It's going to be probably a little bit of both. What do you want from me? I didn't tell you that this is going to be a mountain book. So then I got like really self-conscious. And then I was like, I know that I chickened out on all the resources that I've included in this re-release for Hiking Your Feelings. And so I developed a workbook to complement the book. So I was like, that workbook turned into a program called Read and Reflect, where I hosted like my own little virtual book club during the pandemic, because we were a week into my book tour when the pandemic happened. And so we had planned to do all of these amazing things. We had retreats planned, we had workshops, we had day hikes, we had speaking opportunities, all kinds of stuff coordinated with that book tour. And then it never happened. So I was like, how do we take everything we've been doing out in the field and make it as impactful online? And so we took all of the concepts and all the programming from these experiences that we were planning to host and smushed it all together into a 12-week course called Blaze Your Own Trail to Self-Love. So the book now, Hiking Your Feelings, is the manuscript from the first book, the workbook that I developed to support the first book. Take that, smush it together with my editors, slice and dice. I cut out tens of thousands of words. I rewrote a whole bunch of new stuff for the book to include these resources, like, and to do what I did on the road. Like the first book, I'm telling you my story, but I want you to experience this. How can I help you do that? Here's how. So at the very least, if you aren't able to come to any of our events or experiences, or you can't sign up for a program, if you read the book, you do have tools. And to your point, there's lots of resources in there. And then after the pandemic and we started like opening things back up, at the end of 2020, the Joshua Tree National Park Association invited me to develop a track of programming for the Desert Institute. And so that's what started our work with public lands. And that was where the seed started to like go into the soil for the question that I asked myself on the dock, like, can I replicate this? Can I help people heal in nature, which will then in turn make them passionate about protecting these places? Let's find out. So we started with Joshua Tree, and it was just straight up Hiking My Feelings programming. There's no conservation aspect. But when you sign up for, and this was something that I didn't know, when you sign up for a program that is hosted by these official nonprofit partners of our national parks, like the Joshua Tree National Park Association for Joshua Tree, Sequoia Parks Conservancy here, Yosemite Conservancy, on and on. They're responsible for education in the park. They are the educational park partner because rangers can't do it all. So by signing up for those kinds of programs, you're already supporting public lands. Now, are you getting your hands on the dirt or the sand? No, but you are funding the projects that go into the park. So I was like, okay, I feel good about that. Like, we're supporting Joshua Tree National Park by hosting these programs. We're helping people reconnect with themselves, with this community of like-minded people that are all here to experience the same thing, and with the land itself. And so the evolution of that Joshua Tree program, we then expanded into Sequoia National Park. And that's where we're now based in the summers. My husband and I are volunteer camp hosts in Sequoia National Park, and we host our retreats here during the summer season. And it's the most beautiful it is the most beautiful manifestation of a very simple question that I asked myself on a dock in Two Harbors on Catalina Island, where the Sequoia National Park Volunteers and Parks Department assigns us a conservation project. I develop a program that mirrors like the human aspect of the program or the conservation work that we're doing. And then we layer in the existing naturalist programming that's provided by the Sequoia Parks Conservancy. So it's it's a beautiful partnership. And in the case of Sequoia National Park, we've been supporting an invasive species removal for a meadow restoration for the past 3 summers. And what we teach is, okay, we're going out into this meadow. Look at the meadow. And everybody's like, this meadow is beautiful. Some of these trees are thousands of years old. Look at that bear. Oh my God, there's a deer. Look at the lilies. Look at the flowers. Like, there's so much. It's so beautiful. And I'm like, all right, cool. Glad you like it. This is what orchard grass looks like. And then once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's like those moments, like that moment that I had on the trail where I was like, oh my God, I was eating and drinking my feelings because I never told anybody about my worst day. It's like that. You go out there and you're like, oh my God, there's orchard grass everywhere. Like, this meadow needs our help. Oh my God, guys, assemble. Let's go. And so we use this meadow restoration as a visual metaphor for healing in our spirits, in our minds, and our bodies, because we don't actually have that compared to like a physical bone break. Like, you break your arm, you're like, yeah, my bone is broken. I go to the doctor,
Yeah.
I get an x-ray, they confirm it. This bone is sticking out of my skin. It's definitely broken.
Yeah.
But we don't have that kind of visual understanding of what's healing. So we use the meadow as a metaphor. And so you go out there, you're like, this meadow's sick. You're like, this meadow's got it together. And I'm like, I look like I've got it together. I don't. And so then you see the orchard grass, and then you remove the orchard grass. And we're teaching before we go out in the field about invasive thoughts. And then we go remove invasive species. So we're talking about limiting beliefs. We're talking about all the things that I experienced on the island, all of the ways to move through it. What are these things that we tell ourselves? What are these stupid stories, these lies that we've internalized as like deep, deep truths? How do we unpack those? And then we go and we take physical action for the planet, but also for ourselves. And the first time we did this, I got full body goosebumps and I might cry thinking about it. The first time we did it, we teach about limiting beliefs. We go out in the field. And everybody's out there, and like you kind of hear some murmuring, and like I'm encouraging people. I was like, if you want to, you can shout out your limiting belief as you yank it out of the ground. So I was like, see you later, body image. Bye-bye, that thing my mom said about my grades, like whatever. And so everybody's kind of like, they're like, what are you cutting out? Like, what invasive thoughts are you removing as you remove this invasive species? And there's like this community aspect to it. And we only have so much time to think about this between the night before when you learn this material and when we go out and remove plants the next morning. So the lists are kind of short, but they're potent, right? So then this like calm comes over the meadow and it's quiet. And I'm like, this is kind of eerie. And I was like, okay, I think we've all gotten done with our little lists. I was like, all right, y'all, we're healing America now. Snip, snip, racism. Snip, snip, transphobia. Like, we are cutting out the things that people try to tell us, keep us separate. And it was just like, it was so much fun. And then everybody's like, yeah, societal issues. They're like, racism, that sucks. Let's cut it out. Like, it was amazing.
Wow.
And so to have this experience now, we've done this. This will be our 3rd summer supporting this project. The project itself has been going on for 8 years, which is a beautiful metaphor already, because you don't come to one retreat and get fixed. You don't listen to one podcast and you're forever healed. You don't do one meditation that changes. Well, maybe you do. Some meditations are very powerful, but like you have to keep tending to it. Right. And what we see now, like from the year that we started to this year, we can already see like the amount of orchard grass in this big old meadow is coming down like by 50% year after year.
No.
And from a personal perspective, because we have a lot of people that repeat and a lot of people that follow us to our different events on different public lands, it's a nice check-in point too. And it's a reminder that like the limiting beliefs you had last year, what were they? How are they present in your life now? Are they present? What new ones have come up? Because that backpack, for as much as I thought I unpacked everything I've ever experienced in my entire life on that island, I did not. The sexual assault was the heaviest thing at the bottom. I did get to that. But in the years that have passed since that hike, I'm still unpacking. And in this culture where we have this immediate need for gratification, everything's on an instant kind of timeline. I can order something from Amazon, not here in Sequoia, but I could order something in Amazon when like I'm in the Bay Area, and I could get like 2 same-day shipments because I don't want to go drive. To be able to come here, to disconnect from all of that, to have a moment to self-reflect and to do it in between timelines so you can see the progress in the meadow. You can reflect on the progress you've had within yourself. And honestly, there's nothing like it. And the only thing, and it's not even that it's topped it, but there was one piece of this puzzle that's been missing that's very, very important to me. And that is having an Indigenous representation at an event, to have an Indigenous perspective lent to the work that we know is happening here and the perspectives that we're sharing. Because I'm not the first person to heal in nature. I am not the first. I certainly hope I'm not the last. But at the time that this all happened on Catalina, I felt like I was the first and only because I didn't have a community around me that spoke of this stuff in this way. And I didn't even know what to Google, right? So like, I'm just like learning and listening and unlearning and repacking and unpacking and all this stuff. And what I realized was I need to have the perspective of somebody whose people have been here for thousands and thousands and thousands of years to lend credibility, to lend another perspective that validates that this is the way that humans lived for thousands of years before colonialism. And I had the opportunity to have a woman from the Hopi tribe she came up for one of our events earlier this year at Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. And we were doing a similar program. We were in a slot canyon. We were remediating graffiti. And in a slot canyon where sometimes it is this thick and you have to turn sideways, and I had to move my boobs and my butt and my belly to get through. What do you do when you feel constricted? And what is possible if the walls aren't closing in, but that it's something that you can lean on? And how does that guide your experience through this slot canyon? But how does that also guide your experience through life? And we had people sharing, like there was a geologist there and she was sitting under an arch at our closing ceremony. This geologist was, and she was talking about how arches are made stronger as they get destroyed because what's left is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. It's the weak stuff that's going away. This beautiful metaphor. And at one point, my husband's just like scanning the other participants and we're all crying. Like the woman from the Hopi reservation is crying. The facilitators from our partner organization are crying. We're all crying. And we're just like, this is what we need. And I truly believe that like this exploration of these intersections between environmental stewardship, mindful movement, and self-discovery, self-care, this personal journey, it's so powerful because when you're able to, like, the healing power of nature gives you the opportunity to disconnect from this current modern way of life. And when you do that, maybe for the first time ever, because it was certainly one of the first times in my life, you don't have all the distractions. You can hear your inner voice. You can reconnect with your body. And when you do that in such a beautiful place and you start to reconnect to the earth from which we came, you realize, like Native and Indigenous cultures all over the world have known for forever, we are all related. You are my relative. The tree next to the van is my relative. We are all connected. And we are all from the same stuff. We're all from star stuff. Like the cells in my body, the water that I drink, dinosaurs peed in it once. Like it keeps getting recycled. And when we find ourselves inspired by these beautiful places and held by these beautiful places, or in the case of like an expansive sky, like in Montana or out in Joshua Tree, these places where our really squirrely brains with all these racing thoughts can just expand and relax. And there's so much room. Like these different landscapes have different healing powers, and they have the capacity to hold us and remind us of where we came from. And then we start seeing people differently. And then we start seeing ourselves differently. And I really do believe, especially in this day and age where we're approaching a very tumultuous, we are in the middle of a tumultuous time, socially, civilly, as a nation, as a global community of humans. We are so far from that. And I really, truly believe with every cell in my body that this work, and I don't need to be the only one doing it. In fact, that's the pivot that we're making, is like being available, making this programming available to medical practices to therapeutic practices, like to people that are actively practicing, that are realizing like there's something missing, and the missing piece is nature.
Yeah.
And I really believe that this can not only save the planet, but help us save ourselves and reconnect with our communities in a really powerful way.
I love this. This is so, it is incredibly powerful and so well said and so beautifully presented with the work that you're doing. And this is not an accident, and nor is it that day on your birthday when the bison showed up on your birthday. That was like what it recognized you.
Yeah.
It recognized you. We're
Yeah.
one. It knew.
Relatives, for sure.
Thank you. I think it's just wonderful. You're doing so many beautiful things. And yeah, you
Thank
should
you.
come to Vermont. Have you thought about coming to Vermont? And or
Yeah, well, we did
other
an
parts of
event
the
in New
world?
Hampshire in 2019, but I would love, love, love to get up to Vermont. So yeah, let's do some stuff.
I can see your work here in Vermont because the Adirondack Trail comes through here.
Yep.
And there's so many people that really, we love nature here. We really
Yeah.
respect it and do so many things. And you also reminded me of another guest I had on my podcast, Tamara Watts, who's an author, and she has really gotten into conservation work through her birding work. She
Yeah.
had an incident that experienced chronic pain and started to watch birds, and through the watching of the birds it began to heal her. Similarly with your story, she had all these epiphanies around just from the experience of watching the birds, and slowly got out of the house, then slowly started to join bird watching groups, and now she leads them and works with the Audubon Society and creates awareness
Nice.
around birding and how there are endangered species and what we can do. So yeah, there's a lot of parallels, and it's really beautiful. We have these spiritual experiences that connect us to earth, to our home, and the oneness of everybody. It's such an incredibly awakening, inner feeling, right?
100%.
It's not just about me anymore. It's about all of us, because we all are here together. So I love what you're doing, and thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
It's really lovely.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're
I appreciate
welcome.
it.
Yeah, so where can we find you? Your website, what have you got coming up? Your Instagram
Yeah.
handle, please share all of that.
Yeah, so we have our website is hikingmyfeelings.org. Our Instagram is at hikingmyfeelings, and we're on Facebook. We have a YouTube channel that really just kind of documents like what it's like to do this work. So we have some recaps from our events, like Barry and I just kind of talking on our hikes that as we're like planning new things. So people can watch those as well. We have a podcast called Wellness in the Wilderness, and a old podcast that has some really great episodes and interviews called The Virtual Campfire. And as far as what we got coming up, we are headed up to Glacier in the fall, and then we're about ready to open registration for our Joshua Tree events this fall as well. So we have been in Joshua Tree. This will be our 5th season there, and we've done we do the weekend after Thanksgiving, or the weekend of Thanksgiving, so like Black Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We do one of our overnights in Joshua Tree National Park, and then the following Saturday, the first Saturday of December, we have a single day hiking, walking workshop. So, and then looking ahead to 2025, we're still working on our events and expanding how we can introduce more people to the healing power of nature. And as a function of this book and a lot of the speaking engagements and interviews I've been blessed to be able to do this year, we've had a tremendous amount of interest in licensing our programming and being able to train different practitioners and healthcare providers on what we do so they can do it with their patients or with their clients. So that's something that we're really leaning into for 2025 and beyond. Hiking My Feelings as an organization, it's me and my husband. So it's not some big multinational, whatever. We don't have a huge team. It's literally me and Barry. So we're looking to see how we can expand in ways that feel sustainable to us. Because I come from a deep history of overworking as a way of coping. And through this chapter of my life, I've really slowed down on like the hours that I'm logging on work specifically. I've slowed down, and by I've slowed down, I mean like I felt like I slowed down, because when it's your project and you're not doing it for somebody else, you don't realize how fast you're burning out. And so this year in particular has been a really big awakening for me, in that I do really powerful work. I am helping lots of people, and I also need to be able to help myself. So I've been in a little bit of like an incubator this year as I reflect on the past 5 years of Hiking My Feelings and look forward to where we're taking this and how we can help more people that isn't reliant on me and Barry being in a space, because I'd love to see this just take off all over the world. And I think that it's possible. So you can be part of it.
Yeah, I love
Yay!
that. Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Congratulations on all the amazing work you're doing.
I appreciate it.